So, are you all ready for this?
Start with your heads down.
Everybody.
Now look up slowly. Bring your arms up and bring them down.
All right, we got some new theme music today.
Up again, both arms.
Yay!
Death metal!
Turn them down.
Peter, you love the
Bring your
metal.
thumbs to yourself. And down.
Y'all hearing this?
Low to high.
No,
No, it doesn't play for us.
Now this
No.
sides.
this from Silent Bob.
Now your fingers.
All right, well, we want to welcome everybody out to another Ruby Rogues podcast. Today, we have on our panel James Edward Gray from Gray Productions. We have Aaron Patterson from AT&T Interactive. We have Peter Cooper from Ruby Inside and Rails Inside, Coder.io. Fernand, I don't know who you work for, or I didn't do my homework that way, so you want to fill us in?
Sure. Actually, I'm a self-employed software consultant. I've been doing that for I guess over a year and a half, 2 years now, and I host the Rails users group in Denver, Colorado, and I've contributed several open source projects. The mall, Zia for graphic packaging for Rails, and our house, a home automation system built on top of Ruby. So that's the short description of me.
All right, and I'm Charles Max Wood from Teach Me to Code. All right, so this week we're going to be talking about databases. And usually what we do to start out is we actually start going around the panel and ask what databases people are using or have used. There's a lot out there, and I really, instead of jumping into that, I'm a little bit curious as to where people come down as far as SQL or NoSQL. So we're going to go around the panel and ask that instead. Let's go ahead and start with Aaron.
Oh boy, NoSQL or SQL?
Way to put him on the spot. He's freshly back from RailsConf.
I think that you should. I'm a fan of NoSQL, but no is into NoSQL. So I am a fan of SQL.
Okay.
But really, I don't actually particularly care. I just use whichever one is best suited for the job. So, yeah.
That makes sense.
I'm not. That's lame. I know. Not super exciting.
That's okay. James, what do you prefer, SQL or NoSQL?
I only use SQL Server. That's it. Nothing else. Oh, I'm kidding. I like a wide variety of tools. Actually, I do a lot of work with both Postgres and MySQL. I definitely favor Postgres these days, and I think it's time we all just move over there and forget about MySQL. But as far as NoSQL tools, I do use those a ton too. I'm a big Redis user and lover. I was really into Tokyo Cabinet for a long time until they basically abandoned it for Kyoto Cabinet, and that kind of turned me off. So I don't tend to use that as much anymore. I've used Beanstalk for queuing and various databases, NoSQL databases. But I would definitely say Redis is probably my favorite. And then sometimes, I've been known to throw stuff in a flat file too. I'm pretty. I like to play with lots of different approaches to data.
How about CSV?
CSV, I've never used that, ever. Okay, I use it sometimes.
All right, Fernand, what are you using?
I use Access on all my projects. Just kidding. I definitely use a lot of relational database. Postgres, MySQL. I think it really depends, on the type of project you are handling, the size of the database, that what your data set is going to look like. I do like NoSQL solutions when you have requirements where the schema is loosely defined. For that, actually throwing a bone out there. I really like MongoDB. I've used it on several occasions, and definitely, for logging stuff, where you have perhaps, not so well defined type of data structures, I think it works really well. I like the way you query in Mongo. That I think is very intuitive, coming from an SQL background. I also liked it. I've used it on one project where it's kind of funny oxymoron type stuff, but it's basically throwable databases. So you can build a database, play with it, run some reports or statistics, and throw it away. And I think Mongo worked really, really well for that. Because it's very simple, to create a database, to populate it, and to experiment with it, and then let it go. So it's a transient, persistent story in a way. Of course, I've used Docker Cabinet and Redis, which I think are good solutions. But again, it depends on your problem area and the requirements that you have for your project.
All right, terrific. How about you, Peter? What have you been using?
Yeah, I'm a bit like Aaron, I guess. It's that I like to, I don't really care too much about what I use. But unlike Aaron, I kind of use the wrong tool for the right job. Which by that I mean that I often just kind of respond to whatever the current fad is. I used to literally just stick to MySQL the whole time, sort of up to quite a level as well. I got pretty good with it, sort of running some big deployment with it. But then everyone who's kind of done that with MySQL knows all the problems that are involved there. So when the NoSQL thing started to come along, I did have a play with various things. Kind of got swept up with the MongoDB fad briefly. I still use it here and there, but not with any anger, just mostly because I don't really like the APIs to it. I think that's become an important thing for me. It's the APIs that hook into these things is just as important as the underlying technology, since I'm not a complete database head. But then also, this is a nice admission on my part, I actually do really like however you want to pronounce it, SQLite, SQLite, whatever. I do really like it. Just for, if you're working on something that's like a prototype or even something really small, something that doesn't get a lot of traffic. So, for example, RubyFlow, for example. When I started building that, I thought, it was kind of when they just first changed the default in Rails to using SQLite instead of the MySQL demands that were in there. I just thought, let's give this a go. And it just worked. And then I kind of deployed it. I was like, well, I haven't got time to migrate this to MySQL. And I've just left it on there, and it's been fine. Not a single problem. So I am actually a big fan of rolling stuff out on SQLite where it makes sense. So, yeah. Oh, and also, just like I think it was James mentioned, Redis. Massive fan of Redis. But it's just not quite easy enough to deal with multiple databases and stuff in a very logical way with that for me to be using it for every single thing. But for where it makes sense, I love it to bits. It's great. So that's me.
Super.
I love SQLite. I'm so glad Peter brought it up because I totally forgot to mention it. And I've actually scaled it to some pretty high levels. If you have a kind of site where your user data is totally separate from all other user data, it's a internal data only that you would never share with anybody else. Sometimes I'll set that up and I'll just make a SQLite database for each user, and then in that, as the connections are coming in, I'll set up a connection to the right file and then just use that throughout the request, and that scales beautifully, very far.
SQLite's great. I love it because you can hack it.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's super easy to embed. It's super easy to use. It's also fun because you can easily do in-memory databases, which is really fun. So if you want to just create a database and throw it away, you don't even have to worry about it. It's awesome.
And works with Active Record, which is good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other awesome thing about in-memory databases, you can build an in-memory database and then dump it to the file system if you want. So a couple of times where I've had to do a whole bunch of processing really quick, I build up the whole thing in memory and then dump it to the file system. It's dramatically faster than dumping it all as you go.
So a bit like the Redis approach.
Right, exactly.
I actually worked for a company that stored settings for each user in a SQLite database, and that SQLite database was stored as binary data in the MySQL database, which was yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
And
I don't think I would recommend that.
yeah, I don't know that I would either. I don't know if any of the guys that did it would either. But anyway, it was interesting, and it's interesting to know that there is a possibility of doing something like that.
Was that at Lehman Brothers?
No. Yeah.
If you are playing with SQLite, there's a underloved plugin for it, or a Ruby library for it, extension. It's called Amalgalite by Jeremy Heingardner, and it embeds SQLite in the extension. So I like it way better than the library that Rails uses for SQLite.
What? Why?
Sorry. Because it embeds SQLite in the extension. So whenever I use the version that Rails uses, then I deploy it to the production server, and it has a different version of SQLite. And since it just dynamically links to that, I get bugs and stuff in my SQL code. Whereas if I have SQLite embedded in the extension like it was meant to be embedded in an extension, then I don't have that problem because the SQLite code is right there.
That's how Perl does it. The DBD DBD SQLite module actually includes it right in there.
Yeah, that's
So
the
same
way.
approach.
That's the way the SQLite team tells you to embed SQLite.
So can I clarify really quickly? What you're saying is that the deal in Rails binds to a C library, and the other one is pure Ruby?
No.
No?
The other one is all C as well. It's just that it ships with the SQLite C code embedded.
Okay.
Yes. And SQLite is an embedded database, so that's what you're supposed to do with it. You're supposed to embed it.
Okay.
You've been told.
Yeah, but then you have to deal with compilation problems on all the systems. I don't want to deal with that.
Compilation problem. Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess I do see that aspect of it, but I don't know. I think linking against a DLL is probably about equal evil, in my opinion.
SQLite's a good compile, though.
Yeah, exactly.
I've never had a problem with it.
Exactly. I can't ever think of a place I've tried to compile SQLite and it didn't just work.
So
but have you tried compiling on like Solaris or AIX or something like that?
Atari ST.
No, but I've never tried running my Rails app there either.
So one of these days, you start running a project like that, and then all of a sudden you get a bug report that's like, can't compile this on AIX, and you're just like, what?
So I have to ask two questions then, and the first one is, what was the name of that library again, James?
Amalgalite.
Amalgalite.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second question is MySQL or Solaris or whatever. We're all talking about Oracle, right? I mean, Oracle owns all of those properties, right?
Oracle owns MySQL.
I'm surprised nobody brought up Oracle as a database. What's you guys feeling on that?
Yeah, aren't we all using that? I mean, come on.
We use Oracle at work.
You do?
Yeah.
It's because he works for an enterprise.
They can afford it.
Yes.
Yeah. I worked for a university that used it, and the DBAs had to have like special certifications and stuff to deal with it, and it was.
Yeah, it's a
Certificate of insanity.
Yeah. So I'm a little curious, and this is more for my edification and my ignorance, I guess, but it seems like there are a lot of MySQL haters, or at least we prefer anything other than MySQL. I'm wondering is it because you like the other databases better, or is there something in particular you don't like about MySQL?
So let's go around the room on that one.
I'll go first. I don't necessarily hate MySQL at all. I don't actually hate any particular technology. I just wouldn't use it, and it comes from a few things. First off, I don't like the licensing. I don't like that it's GPL. So that causes problems with like dealing with, for example, C extensions. When you link against libmysql, do you have to follow the GPL clause, or is MIT okay? And I am a programmer. I don't have the mind to think about problems like that. Whereas with SQLite, it's public domain. Don't even have to think about it. Totally free to use it.
What about Postgres?
And Postgres is MIT.
MIT. Okay.
The other thing I don't like about MySQL simply comes from the underlying protocol and how you actually use the C libraries. Like when you do prepared statements versus regular statements, the data types that come back are different. So that makes writing an adapter around their API kind of difficult because you can't say that the return value is consistent. For example, if you select a date using the normal statement or using the normal API, you get a string back, whereas if you select it using the prepared statement API, you get a special struct back. So you have to put special cases in your code to deal with those situations. And I mean, that's stuff we wrap up in active record, so most people don't have to deal with it, but I have to deal with it, and it's a headache for me.
Okay.
Peter, you chimed in. Wait, you said you like MySQL?
I was just saying I like it, but just for all the bad reasons that people like MySQL, which is the fact, in the past, less so now, but in the past, it's very easy to install, very easy to get going with, integrate with everything. Postgres, I mean, I must admit I have very little experience with Postgres, but, and I think things have changed in that department over the last few years. But like when I was looking at it 3-4 years ago, it was quite an opaque process. It was one of these kind of like, really dense text files, and you had to like hook this up, chmod this. And, there was a lot of work to be done and, a lot of hoops to jump through. Hopefully they've improved that. But MySQL, just was a lot easier back in the day.
Yeah, I've been using MySQL, but it's mainly because that's what I've been using forever. So, I've always been curious as to why people prefer, one over the other. And so, Aaron brought up some interesting reasons to look into Postgres or some of these others. James, you keep bringing up that you like Postgres a lot better than MySQL. Are there any particular reasons or capabilities or anything that you see in Postgres that's not in MySQL?
Absolutely. So I was a big MySQL fan for a long time too, and kind of late making the switch just because that's what I learned on, and so that's what I was comfortable with. But then, and I was like Peter. I looked at Postgres a couple of times in the past. I thought, man, it's kind of a pain in the butt to get into. I definitely feel it's gotten better, to answer Peter's point. Especially if you use Homebrew. I mean, it's just, Homebrew install Postgres and you're done, So I really like that. And then once you get into Postgres and you realize that it really is a great database and it's built with a great feature set in mind. And I mean, just all the time you're finding stuff in there that you just love. It's so capable. So David Brady, who couldn't join us today, actually wrote an email telling us that once upon a time, he implemented an adventure game, a small text adventure game using Postgres scripting language. And that's a great example of how powerful Postgres is and how easy it is to do things. So I've been promoting a QClassic library for Ruby lately that I saw at Red Dirt, and it's a queue system implemented inside of Postgres using its amazing locking capabilities and its publish subscribe that's built in and stuff like that. Aaron was just showing off HStore, which is Postgres built-in NoSQL key value store. He was showing that off in his keynote at RailsConf. So, it's once you get into Postgres and you realize there's just tons of features in there and so many things that you have to do when you're on MySQL. Like when you're on MySQL and you're ready to add text search, it's like, okay, which thing am I going to go get to do text search? Because you can't really do it in MySQL. I mean, you kind of can if you switch tables, but that gets into one of MySQL's major weaknesses, how switching tables is horrible and you lose some features and gain others. Whereas Postgres just has that built right in, full text search. You just set it up and you're done. So Postgres is definitely a programmer's database in my opinion.
You're selling me.
Yeah, I was going to say, you said full text search is built in, and I'm just like, oh, yeah, okay, I can do that.
We're listening.
No kidding. Fernand, do you have an opinion on this?
Kind of. Actually, I'm more like a I like things, keep things simple. So, initially, and I think it all depends on your requirements and what type of application you're actually building, right? I mean, I think MySQL, I mean, that's my personal opinion. I think it's fine, if you're dealing, with, tens of thousands of records, or, not in the scale of like millions and millions and perhaps, lots of updates to the database. I mean, that's a simple way in. I agree with Peter. The install is that simple. The distribution is pretty, wide, so it's, easy to get it on your system. So I kind of like to start there. It's almost like this kind of makes me think, of in a way, like performance, optimization type scenarios where, you kind of like, if you try to put in your performance, prior to getting something done, you're going to end up doing it over and over again. So I think any database solution is probably fine, until you get a phone call at 3 a.m., with, your application is crapping out. So I think really, use the best tool for the job and basically try to figure out, where you're going to be the most efficient debugging and finding the issue with your database tool. So I think, it kind of brings up, another argument, related to database, and, can expand on that. But, I will coin it as the Guido's principle, which kind of states that, you keep assigning tasks to a great developer and expecting him to be a good database admin or a good sysadmin. I think, there's also, perhaps, due to cost measure and things like that. But I think if you're really doing a lot of database, within your application, a lot of database, requirements such as, replication, or you are dealing with, millions or terabytes, worth of data, then also, is the developer the best person to actually make those kind of decisions versus bringing in, a database administrator into your organization.
Right.
So that's kind of like, I think everybody's got chops, in database and or sysadmin for that matter. But, where do you get to a point where you're getting diminishing returns, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a really good point, actually. I think that in our industry, we tend to just have the developer do all the database work, but there are actually people that know how to do that crap, and are better at it than we are, no matter what we tell ourselves. And sometimes a project is big enough that you probably ought to take that seriously and use a professional,
Yeah, I agree. One thing that Fernand brought up too was kind of using the right tool for the job and also using the right tool for you. I kind of got both of those out of that. But in using the right tool for the job, I mean, there are a lot of different types of databases and a lot of different problems that they solve. And so I'm going to kind of go through some of the different types of databases and get some opinions on what they're good for and what people might be using them for that they ought to reconsider. And the first one that I want to ask about is the key value type database. And so you have things like Memcached or Redis or Tokyo Cabinet, I think, is also key value. I might be wrong on that.
It is.
But what are those good for? What problems do they solve well?
So I would say they're great for when you want a big hash in the sky, is basically what they're good for. And then they all have their different flavors. Like, for example, Memcache is still the best of the best for the simple caches, in my opinion. And I really like it for that. It has better expiration than Redis. It has better memory adjustments than Redis. So I think it really... No, I think it excels at that.
I hear dissent. Peter?
I know. Peter, what do you think?
No, I mean, no, I just in all of my experiments, I used Memcache a few years ago now, so it may well have improved. But just in like very, very basic tests, I just found Memcache to be, I found it slower than Redis for a start. Not by a massive amount, but a little bit. But no, I just find Redis to be a lot more configurable, like on the memory side of things. But I mean, I guess he's been adding in a lot more stuff recently, like the different types of storage systems that are going to be coming in, and this and that. I guess perhaps I see a lot more promise in Redis than Memcache going forward.
So I should go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just saying. I just prefer the configuration of it as is now. I just find it a lot more configurable than Memcache.
So I will agree that Redis is very configurable, but actually what I was referring to, and I didn't make this clear, Memcache uses better algorithms for some things. Like, for example, when you set a time to live on a key in Memcache and you set it for 10 minutes, but then you keep reading that key over and over again, it's 10 minutes from the last time you read that key. When you set, so basically if the data stays hot, it stays in memory. When you set a time to live in Redis as 10 minutes, then that means 10 minutes. And even if you're accessing the heck out of it, 10 minutes from now, it's gone.
Oh, sure.
So that, I think, makes it not as good a choice for cache handling and stuff like that. In Redis, you can fix that, but you have to also do a write to the key to update the time to live, basically, which kind of kills the point, in my opinion. And then the other thing, when I said memory and Memcache, when Memcache runs out of memory, it uses a more intelligent algorithm to expire the keys, and it will favor keys that are getting less usage or haven't been used in a long time. So it tends to do a better job of dropping things out of the cache that are old and not really being used anymore. Whereas Redis uses a very simple, fast algorithm, but doesn't do as good a job at expiring the right things.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So I still think Memcache is king on caches. Redis is kind of like, to me, in my opinion, it's the ultimate networking toolkit database. It's basically like if you want a data structure on the network that you can share, between processes, requests, whatever. I think Redis really kills at that. It's really good for real-time statistics. Like for a while, it was used to do those download counts on rubygems.org, whereas people would download, it would increment counters in Redis, and then you could go sit on the page and watch it update. That was an excellent use of Redis. And then Tokyo Cabinet is basically kind of falling into obscurity, so I won't even bother to say what I think it's good for anymore. It's people are probably leaving it behind.
All right. Anyone else want to chime in on that? Aaron?
All at once.
Well, we've only used, pretty much NoSQL stuff that I've used in production. We typically use it for caches, really. Like I've never had to scale up Mongo at all. The databases I have had to scale up are Oracle and MySQL. But the MySQL times, like we used MySQL for millions of rows, but the only time we used it for that was a read-only cache. So I've never had to deal with it for writes. As far as I can tell, it seems bad if we had to deal with it for writes. But as far as like NoSQL stuff, really I've only used it for cache, and we typically use Memcache or Tokyo Cabinet, but I guess we're switching off that because of stuff that James is talking about. But yeah, I mean, I don't know.
All right.
I totally agree with James, on the Memcache versus Redis. I just wanted to add a note. So, there is features, as James pointed out, I think, in Postgres to basically, embed hashes, in a column on a table. But, I also think that, this is fine. And, Postgres obviously, gives you some hooks, to, query there. But I think if you start getting into those, areas, it's kind of like somewhat of a gray area to me. And that's where, you may want to consider, a NoSQL solution, because if you're stashing, hash of values, inside, a column, and and you're starting getting it down that path, you probably want to step back and look at what you're going to actually do with that data. And I think that's where you may want to consider a NoSQL type solution, especially knowing how you actually want to query and extract that data back out. And I think when I look at stuff as far as NoSQL solution, again, I'll bring up Mongo because that's the one that I know the most and I've used. It's very easy to actually start, pushing, some data into that store, and especially if you want to, extract some reporting or statistics out of it. So I think that's, I think a good use case scenario for considering a NoSQL solution.
So now that we're moving to Mongo, Mongo's more of a document database than a key value store, which is a little bit different in that it's basically more like instead of a hash in the sky, it's more like a hash of hashes in the sky, right? Kind of.
Right.
Hash
Have you
squared.
used it? Have you used it in production, James?
So no, I haven't. I've played with it a couple of times, and so there's like something I really like about Mongo, which I think it's a real developer-friendly database, and I like that about it. And like Fernand says, when you're getting into scenarios where your data is changing a lot, the schema version of it, or things like that, then it seems like it's almost an ideal tool. The thing that continually scares me off of Mongo is I worry that some of the production concerns have never been addressed. I can't get anybody to realistically tell me how you're supposed to back up a Mongo database without taking it offline. I mean, seriously, back it up, just drop a backup, or things like that. They kind of worry me about putting it into production. And maybe it's just that I haven't dug deep enough in that world and found the right thing. So I'm a little bit scared of putting it in production.
I've heard the same things, especially after this the Amazon outage. I heard some horror stories after that, like not being able to recover a Mongo database.
I've heard that too. I've also heard that Mongo, I think it's Mongo. In fact, I'm almost positive it was because I was talking to somebody about it. It logs the queries that come in to a log, and so you can basically play it back and get your database back depending on when you took a snapshot of that file. But it's kind of an eventual consistency thing. It doesn't do it on every query. It does it every so often. So you do run the risk of not being able to get everything back if you're backing up that file.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, go ahead, Aaron. Sorry.
Oh no, that's just why I was going to say why I typically use these things as caches, so that I have in case the thing dies, I can rebuild it from, say, a regular SQL database.
Yeah, I think I agree with you guys. I mean, that's definitely been a flaw, with Mongo, and I'm kind of out of date. I don't know if they have actually addressed some of those issues, but I think. And perhaps, you can extrapolate that to be more generalistic. But I think, if you do look at NoSQL, I think it might be advantageous to also know whether you can actually recreate the database in case, you run into those issues where, something gets corrupted or you're losing things. And I think, a good scenario, especially for Mongo, is that, you can put it in there, but you can either rebuild it or you don't really care about, the accuracy of the data for that matter, right? So the two cases where I thought, it was a good match is for basically, logging, some kind of events, coming out of your application where, just having every single logs may not actually matter all that much, or the ability to actually be able to dump it to a Mongo instance, run some queries, do some reporting, and then, throw it away or be able to rebuild it. So I think that's a good scenario for that.
That's really interesting. I've talked to a few people about data warehousing, and that might be really interesting. Where because with data warehousing, what you effectively do is flatten your data so that you don't have to worry about joins and this and that, and then you do the queries on it. And I can see where that would be handy in Mongo. I also started, just as kind of a fun little project, I started writing a blog engine on Sinatra and used MongoDB as my back end. And, you can stop and start Mongo and it'll shut off your database and then bring it back up. So it is persistently storing it. And I haven't really looked at where or how, but just interesting things. It really is nice too if you have. I kind of liked it for the fact that I could let people then extend the blog engine eventually, and effectively just add fields to the posts or whatever on the blog without actually worrying about the actual schema.
Right. I think that's the interesting thing, because really, I guess I disagree with you, James, on that. It really is more than a hash of hash, because you don't have to traverse the whole thing, because you do have a query language that you can leverage to navigate ad hoc, the document hierarchies. I think that's kind of attractive about Mongo. That's to your point, Charlie.
Yeah, that's a good point. That Fernand makes a good point there. And even to go one further, Mongo can actually have things nested in its fields, almost like hash and a hash and a hash, and you can still query across it. So that is kind of neat. Go ahead.
Sorry, the other thing too, I'm thinking about this, it just triggered a point here, James, is, the other cool thing about Mongo is that people may want to think about too, is that, because it is so flexible, because there's no predefined schema and it's easy to modify schema on the fly, I found it also kind of interesting to basically refine your schema. If you do have, you can experiment with it and look at the queries and look at how you're going to, traverse down, the hierarchy, and basically kind of maybe use it as a prototyping tool to figure out, how the best way to set your schema up together, right? So that's kind of an interesting thing too.
This is an interesting idea. I really like the point Aaron and Fernand made a bit back, where they basically said,